Okay, let's really dig into this. Blowing from a gun. I mean, the very phrase, it conjures up this almost unbelievable image, doesn't
It
it?
really does. Something incredibly grim, almost theatrical in its violence.
Yeah. But the reality, based on descriptions like George Carter's stance, was just brutally immediate. Final.
Absolutely final.
Well, picture this. A person tied tight to the muzzle of a cannon,
Hmm.
the orders given, the cannon fires, and Stent describes this scene of just, well, utter destruction.
Utter destruction is right.
He says the head would soar like dozens of feet in the air,
Wow.
limbs scattered hundreds of yards, and the torso,
Gone.
just gone. Not a trace left, apparently.
What strikes you immediately is that sheer violence and the public nature of it, the spectacle.
Right. This wasn't just about ending a life.
No, not at all. It was
Right.
about complete obliteration, annihilation, really, for everyone to see.
Exactly. And that visual impact, that total annihilation, that seems key, key to understanding why this method of execution lasted for centuries.
And across such a wide range of places, too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's our mission today, really, to delve into the history and the use of blowing from a gun based on this very detailed Wikipedia article we've been looking at.
And what jumped out at me, like you said, was just how long it persisted.
Right. And how geographically diverse it was from the 16th century.
Right up into the 20th. It's kind of staggering.
It really is. When you look at the sweep of history and geography involved, you start seeing how all these different powers
Operating in vastly different circumstances.
all somehow landed on this particularly extreme method of punishment.
Yeah.
We're talking the Portuguese Empire,
Mughals,
the British Empire, especially in India. That's a big one.
a very big one.
And even Afghanistan, much more recently.
So where did it all begin? You mentioned the Portuguese.
Yeah, it looks like they were among the sort of early adopters, using it in their empire as early as 1509.
1509. That's
Yeah.
quite early. And where were they using it?
Well, their reach was huge, right? So we see it in Ceylon, Sri Lanka now,
Okay.
over in Mozambique in Africa. And even across the Atlantic in Brazil, there's a specific case mentioned, 1618.
Oh, yeah.
An indigenous leader named Amaro executed this way. It really underscores the brutal methods used to maintain control in those colonies.
Definitely shows the lengths they'd go to. So after the Portuguese, the Mughals picked it up.
Seems so, pretty extensively too, from the 17th into the 18th century.
And their main use was rebels.
Primarily, yeah, against those who rebelled against Mughal rule, which, makes a grim kind of sense, given the terror it would inspire.
It's all about sending a message, isn't it?
Absolutely. The Mughal examples really highlight that intent to just crush any defiance.
You think about Humayun, 1526, reportedly using cannons on 100 Afghan prisoners.
100, yeah.
Or Aurangzeb using it against Jat rebels later on.
There's also that case of Purbil Singh, the last Hindu chief of Umga, brought to Aurangabad and Halsil while same end.
Horrifying. And maybe the most chilling detail is that order about Banda Singh Bahadur's son.
Oh, right, to literally blow him to bits by a cannon.
Yeah. I mean, the language itself is brutal. It leaves nothing to the imagination about the consequences of resistance.
But it wasn't just for rebellion, was it? It seems they used it for other things, too.
That's right. More sort of common crimes, if you can call them that in this context.
Like Jahangir. He had religious leaders blown from guns. For what?
For approving a forced marriage, apparently.
Wow. Okay.
And there are records of it being used against, thieves, deserters from the army, stuff like that.
It paints a picture of a society where this extreme level of violence was just, an accepted tool.
An instrument for maintaining order, however shocking it seems to us now.
What does that tell us about their approach to justice, you think?
Well, it's a crucial point. When you see it applied not just to big uprisings, but also to individuals who broke social or military rules, it suggests a very different threshold for what was a capital offense and, what the acceptable ways of dealing with it were.
Right. Public, absolute punishment just seemed embedded.
Deeply embedded, yeah.
Okay, let's shift over to the British, the East India Company, and then the British Empire proper.
This is where the image really gets cemented, isn't it? Particularly with India.
Definitely. And apparently, when the British adopted it, they actually called it an old Mughal punishment.
Yeah, they acknowledged its roots.
So why did they gravitate towards it? What was the thinking there?
Well, it's interesting. The initial reasoning, or at least the justification given, was that it was more of a deterrent, certainly more public.
Okay, makes sense.
And get this, They even argued it was more humane than flogging to death.
More humane, seriously. Compared to being blown apart by a cannon?
Compared to an agonizing, prolonged death by flogging, yes. That was the comparison they drew.
Wow. That comparison alone tells you a lot, doesn't it, about the mindset?
It reveals a really chilling perspective on colonial justice, yeah.
So when did the British first use it?
The first recorded British use seems to be 1761 against a leader of thieves in Lakipur.
So kind of echoing the Mughal use against perceived threats to order?
Seems like it. A sort of continuity there.
What's really striking, though, is how often it was used on sepoys, the Indian soldiers, for mutiny or desertion before the big 1857 rebellion.
Yeah, it wasn't just a reaction to that one event. It was established practice.
We've got documented cases from 1764, a subadar planning to defect.
And Hector Munro, that same year, executing, what, 24, 25 ringleaders?
Yeah, for desertion, swift and brutal.
Then Muktum Sahib in 1775 for inciting mutiny.
Incidents in Bardhaman and Barrackpore in 1782.
During the Third Anglo-Mysore War as well, 1789 to 92.
Right, this wasn't some rare, isolated thing.
No, these pre-1857 examples show it was an established, if horrific, part of British military justice in India.
A tool in their toolbox.
A deliberate strategy, it seems, using extreme violence to maintain discipline in the ranks.
Now, interestingly, it wasn't only used on Indian sepoys. There's that one case.
Oh, the British soldier. Forster.
Yeah, 1798. Blown from a gun. That seems really unusual.
It certainly stands out. Makes you wonder what he could have done.
Exactly. It suggests that while, the primary targets were definitely the local population,
it wasn't completely off limits for Europeans in really extreme cases.
We also see officers facing it, 2 of them in 1804 for refusing orders.
Right. And then after the Vellore Mutiny in 1806.
The Travancore Plot in 1812.
Deserters joining the ousted Raja of Nagpur in 1819.
The Bangalore Conspiracy, 1832. It just keeps cropping up.
It really paints a picture of a regime absolutely willing to use ultimate force to crush any challenge, any dissent.
But it wasn't always carried out, was it? The article mentions some pardons or commutations.
That's true. It wasn't always absolute. There's that bizarre 1784 case.
Oh, where the fuse kept going out.
Yeah. 3 times it wouldn't light, almost darkly comedic.
Almost.
Then you have the Midnapore mutineers in 1795 who were pardoned.
And Bindi Tirari from the Barrackpore Mutiny, he was sentenced to the camp.
But was hanged instead, right?
Yeah. And that Sepoy Rungish in 1836, his sentence was commuted to transportation.
So what do these exceptions tell us?
Well, maybe they offer a little glimpse into, I don't know, complexities, occasional internal debates within the colonial administration.
Perhaps. Even when dealing with perceived serious threats, maybe there are other factors at play sometimes. Moments of pragmatism, or even rare clemency.
Could be. Now, when we get to the Indian Rebellion of 1857...
Ah, yes. This is where the association becomes really strong.
Indelible, really. Blowing from a gun became this potent, terrifying symbol of the British response.
Absolutely. And the reports from the time, like in Allen's Indian Mail, they're chilling.
They really are. Just look at June 1857 alone. June 8th, 2 sepoys.
June 10th, a staggering 40 in Ludhiana and Peshawar.
40. And June 13th, another 10 in Firozpur, 10 more in Ambala?
It wasn't just isolated retribution, it was widespread, systematic.
And the official stats back that up. Peshawar Valley, May to September 57.
How many?
Out of 523 executed, 44 were blown from guns.
44. Wow.
And interestingly, some of those were listed as desertion, not just mutiny.
Right. And there were similar figures from Agra and Indore mentioned, too.
It underscores the systematic nature. A deliberate tool to instill terror, break the will to resist.
Exactly. Pure psychological warfare alongside the physical destruction.
The article also mentions, though, reports of Indian insurgents using the same method against British civilians.
Well, yes. Mr. and Mrs. Birch, Mrs. Eckford, Mrs. DeFontaine at Fadigar.
It's a grim reminder that the violence was, well, it went both ways, inflicting suffering on all sides.
Yeah, these reports, you have to consider the source, highly charged context, obviously.
Sure.
But they do speak to the sheer brutality of the conflict and how extreme violence can sometimes be mirrored.
There's also that really unsettling detail about the skull, Alum Beg.
Oh, right. The sepoy blown from a gun whose skull ended up in a British pub.
Yeah, and apparently inspired a book. It's just macabre.
It really is. A macabre artifact. Speaks volumes about the aftermath, how the rebellion was, I don't know, processed or remembered back in Britain.
Or trivialized, maybe?
That too. It's a stark illustration of the dehumanization that happens in these conflicts. A severed head is a pub curiosity.
Just chilling. And even after 1857, the British didn't completely stop using this method.
No, surprisingly, there's that horrific case in
In
1871.
Namdari Sikhs, 65 of them blown from guns.
65. That's more than a decade after the main rebellion ended.
It suggests that, despite everything, this extreme method was still in the playbook.
Still part of the repertoire of colonial power when dealing with perceived threats.
And then even later, 1906, the Bombatha Rebellion in Natal.
Ah, the Zulu men sentenced.
A dozen of them, yeah. Sentenced to be blown up from the mouth of a cannon. This is the early 20th century.
You'd think things might have changed by then.
Right. What do you make of that instance so late?
It's deeply troubling, especially because the Secretary of State in London initially tried to stop it.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, intervene. But then, faced with local white public opinion in Natal,
He backed down.
he backed down, and the executions went ahead.
Wow. So local power dynamics could override even London.
Apparently so. It highlights those complex, often contradictory pressures within colonial rule, leading to these brutal outcomes, even in the modern era.
Okay, let's shift focus. Afghanistan. They also had a history with this.
A long and pretty grim one, yeah. From the early 19th century right up to 1930.
1930, that's recent.
It is. And apparently it was seen as particularly useful there.
Why?
Well, the context was often weak central government, lots of internal rebellions. So this was seen as an effective tool for control.
So not just a European colonial thing then?
Not solely, no. The Durrani dynasty used it back in the early 1800s to suppress dissent.
There's an example, 1802, a Ghilzai leader and his sons.
Right. And during the First Anglo-Afghan War, 1841, it was used for murder and also on captured rebel leaders.
Then we get to the reign of Abdurrahman Khan, the Iron Emir.
Ah, yes, 1880 to 1901. His moniker was definitely earned.
The scale of executions under him sounds just staggering.
An estimated 5,000 per year.
5,000?
And a significant number of those were by blowing from guns. The article mentions 24 recorded in just 1 month, December 1889.
And that wasn't the only brutal method he used, apparently.
Though he was known for his ruthlessness. It underscores how he consolidated and maintained his power, extreme violence as a primary tool of the state.
And even as late as 1929, this Tajik reign of terror.
Under Habibullah Kalakani, yeah. Political opponents frequently met this end.
There was even a New York Times headline from 1930, 11 Afghans blown from guns at Kabul.
1930. It's a stark reminder, isn't it, how recently this was still happening.
It really is, not just some relic of a distant, uncivilized past.
No. In specific political contexts, even in the early 20th century, it remained a method of state-sanctioned killing.
So let's talk a bit more about the mechanics, the rituals, the problems.
Okay.
The usual method seems to be tying the person to the front of the cannon's muzzle.
Right, facing the muzzle usually.
An 1839 account from Afghanistan mentions ropes across the gun's wheels to keep them fixed.
Securing them firmly, and then they'd use either blank cartridges
Or grape shot, which sounds much worse.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Grape shot was clusters of small iron balls. It would cause devastating fragmentation, utterly tear the body apart.
Even blanks, though. The concussive force at point-blank range must have been immense.
Immense. Still incredibly destructive. Grape shot just made it an even more gruesome, chaotic spectacle.
There's that really disturbing alleged case from Istanbul, 1596. Someone put inside the gun.
That image is just horrifying to even contemplate.
Right, and apparently sometimes people were fastened to rockets.
Yeah, launched into the air. These variations seem to move beyond execution into almost theatrical brutality.
Performative displays of power and punishment.
Exactly. Public terror, bordering on the macabre.
But there were practical problems too, weren't there?
Well, yes. It wasn't exactly a precise science.
That 1857 incident in Firozpur where they used grape shot instead of blanks.
Right, unintended consequences. People in the crowd were hit, soldiers injured by flying debris.
It just shows how unpredictable and dangerous it was, even for the executioners.
Absolutely. Chaotic violence, inherently imprecise.
And that other account, the soldier who slipped his bonds.
Oh, that's a grim one.
The pistol caps snapping, not firing. They eventually had to use a rifle.
It just paints this picture of a prolonged, agonizing, terrifying end, not swift at all.
Really brings home the human suffering involved. Strips away any idea of a clean execution.
Exposes the raw, terrifying reality for the person condemned.
And then the mentions of birds of prey, dogs scavenging the remains.
Yeah, Emphasizes the utter destruction, the complete lack of dignity,
Intentional desecration, really.
denying any semblance of respect in death.
Now, in the Indian subcontinent, there was also a religious angle to this, wasn't there?
A very significant one, yes, for both Hindus and Muslims.
How so?
Well, the complete destruction and scattering of the body made traditional funeral rites impossible.
I see. So the proper rituals couldn't be performed.
Exactly. Which, according to their beliefs, had implications for the afterlife. So the punishment was extended beyond death itself.
Wow, that adds another whole layer of cruelty and control.
It really does. Punishing not just the body in this life, but potentially the soul in the next. It's a deep, brutal intersection of power, culture, and religious belief.
But interestingly, the article notes that foreign occupiers elsewhere generally didn't use this specific method.
That's an interesting observation. It seems to have had a particular resonance or history in the Indian subcontinent and Afghanistan.
Why do you think that might be?
Hard to say for sure. Perhaps it was seen as particularly effective or symbolically potent in those regions, maybe tied to pre-existing cultural ideas about the body, death, the severity needed to deter rebellion.
Could be. While extreme violence was a tool of empire everywhere, this specific form seems concentrated.
It does suggest a regional specificity for whatever reason.
And finally, the article touches on that chilling modern echo.
The allegation about North Korea.
Yeah, a defector claiming they use anti-aircraft guns for public executions. Blown apart.
It's a really sobering thought, isn't it, that something terrifyingly similar might still exist today.
It truly is a stark, unsettling reminder that this capacity for extreme state violence hasn't vanished.
Not entirely relegated to the history books, unfortunately.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that blowing from a gun has this surprisingly long, widespread, and brutal history.
Absolutely. Used by different empires, different regimes, for different reasons, deterrence, crushing rebellion.
Even with religious implications. A practice marked by its public spectacle, its terrifying efficiency, and its often unpredictable cruelty.
And what really stands out is how this one horrific method connects so many different times and places.
Yeah. It forces you to confront these extreme manifestations of state power, the shocking lengths authorities went to for control.
It really does.
These stark, often gruesome details, they offer a powerful, if disturbing, insight into historical methods of punishment and control. And it really makes you think, doesn't it, about how these extreme acts reflect the power dynamics, the ideologies of the time. What does it tell us about the value placed on the human body, or beliefs about the afterlife in different cultures, different periods? What kind of profound, maybe uncomfortable questions does this history raise for you listening now about justice, about power, and about the spectacle of violence? It's certainly something to keep contemplating.